Hello and welcome. The first day of America's new president is marked with the tough task of simply getting down to business. A daunting list of priorities face Barack Obama, beginning of course with the ailing U.S. economy. But there's mounting pressure for him to address international issues too. During the presidential campaigning, Mr. Obama was criticized by his then rival Hillary Clinton, who's now his Secretary of State, for being a foreign policy lightweight. He's argued that growing up in Indonesia and being of mixed descent has given him a truly global view of the planet. But how will that manifest itself as he moves forward on the world stage? Is engagement with Tehran likely, for example? How will he handle the extremely difficult Palestinian-Israeli conflict, which had disintegrated into open warfare until just a few days ago? How about the two wars he's inherited as the new commander-in-chief in Afghanistan and in Iraq? Many questions stand, so today we ask, should we expect a clean break from the policies of the Bush administration? And what will the Obama doctrine look like? Remember, you can join our conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com/AJE and then take part. We also welcome your phone calls on the show. Well, joining me from Boston is Ambassador Peter Galbraith, a career diplomat who resigned from government in 2003, allowing him to be more critical on U.S.-Iraq policy. He is now Senior Diplomatic Fellow at the Center for Arms Control and Non-Proliferation, which does research on peace and security issues. Ambassador Galbraith is the author of Unintended Consequences: How War in Iraq Strengthened America's Enemies, a scathing critique of the Bush administration's Iraq policy. And here in Washington, D.C. is Christian Brose, a former speechwriter for Secretaries of State Condoleezza Rice and Colin Powell. He's currently senior editor for Foreign Policy magazine. His article in the most recent edition of that magazine, The Making of George W. Obama, argues that we're likely to end with a lot more of the same in the foreign policy arena instead of a radical departure. Gentlemen, welcome you both to the show.
Thank you.
Ambassador Galbraith, if I could start with you, sir, please. We've heard the phrase, have we heard the end of the phrases such as war on terror, regime change, preventative war, and unilateralism for the next 4 years?
Well, I think there are going to be very radical shifts in policy on those points. What we've had over the last 8 years has been essentially a failed foreign policy. Unilateralism, the Bush administration took the position in the early days, it's our way or the highway, and we discovered that we were essentially alone on the highway. We invaded Iraq with exactly one significant ally on our side, and at this point we're going to have no allies there. So that I think will be different. The concept of preventative war, well, I don't think we're going to have another Iraq, but obviously the Obama administration, like the Bush administration, like the Clinton administration, and in fact almost every American administration, certainly will act if the United States is attacked or on the verge of attack. But the idea that you would go into a country that did not pose a significant threat, and Iraq certainly did not pose a significant threat, even if it had had some chemical weapons, as many people thought, the idea that you would do that I don't think that's going to happen. Certainly that you wouldn't do it unilaterally. The United States, President Bush essentially lost the confidence and the respect of the rest of the world, of world leaders and of public opinion. And when the American president is not respected, in fact, when he's intensely disliked around the world, the U.S. becomes ineffective. Barack Obama represents big change. There's great enthusiasm around the world. It's a great asset. And we can hope he'll use it wisely, and I think he will use it wisely.
Ambassador, with issues such as Iran, you were mentioning some of the actions that the Bush administration had taken. With Iran, of course, there's been talk all along that perhaps an Obama administration might promote dialogue. Under the Bush administration, there was a fairly well-known policy to try to get some kind of or provoke Iran to some degree to create some kind of military action that might allow for a launch against Iran itself. And I wonder if the prospect of dialogue is that much greater if Barack Obama's image is so different now.
I think it is. The problem with the Bush administration, and indeed the problem with unilateralism, is that it was ineffective. It did not serve the U.S. national interest. It didn't accomplish our objectives. And by taking the position that we wouldn't negotiate with the Iranians because they were evil, we were left in the position of either having to take military action, which the administration wasn't willing to do, or doing nothing and let them proceed with their nuclear program, which is what happened. The alternative of dialogue may or may not work. There's no guarantee, but it's certainly better than military action and doing nothing. At least it's worth a try.
Well, Christian Perez, I want to bring you into the show as well. Thank you for being here. And I wonder what happens now to, and you were close to some very senior people in the Bush administration. I wonder what happens now to the Bush administration effort to spread democracy, at least an American-style democracy in many parts of the world. Was that in any way misguided, looking back on it?
No, I think looking back on it, it wasn't misguided. I think the idea was not unique to the Bush administration. I think if you look at the history of U.S. foreign policy, you see this theme again and again. You see this effort again and again, the belief that as our ideals, freedom, democracy, human dignity, spread throughout the world, that it actually increases America's security, it enhances our interest. I think where you can fault the administration was in the application of that in some cases. You know, pushing for elections in certain places, perhaps prematurely, seeing the application of that idea a little bit spread in one place, but not necessarily in the other. I think there are problems as you've touched on. But I think if you look at President Obama's inaugural yesterday, you heard many of the same themes that you could probably pull out and put right next to some of the things George Bush said in 2005, and they wouldn't sound all that different.
So is your belief that there will probably not be much change in foreign policy based on the idea that Barack Obama himself perhaps believes those ideas, or that there is too much invested in what America has done up to now, that it's too heavily invested and involved in what's going on under the past 8 years to really change things?
Yeah, I think you have to look at it on a case-by-case basis. I think there will certainly be a lot of change, as we've already started to see with his announcement that he's going to be ending military commissions, and expected later this week is that he's going to be issuing orders to close Guantanamo Bay. That's a major change, which some in the Bush administration pushed for, but were unable to accomplish. But I think that a lot of the policies that were put in place in the second term of the Bush administration, this is picking up a little bit on what Ambassador Galbraith said. If you look at the first term, you can see certain things that are much different, I think, than what President Obama will be doing. But there were major changes between the first and the second term of George Bush. And a lot of the policies that were put in place in the second term, I think, are what's going to endure. And those changes were not always focused on as much. And I think we're still stuck on the idea that this was an entirely unilateralist administration. It was entirely preemptive. We're still sort of responding to a caricature of what the first term policies were without recognizing some of the changes that took place in the second term.
We'll look at some of the things that might change, though, under an Obama administration in a moment. Let me get Dharma in from Washington State here in the U.S. Thanks for your question. What would you like to ask?
Hi, I was just curious. I'd like to ask any of your callers if they feel the ceasefire within Gaza had anything to do with the timing of the inauguration or anything like that, if they want to shed any comments on that situation.
Sure, thank you. Ambassador Galbraith, of course, there was a lot of speculation that Israel's timing was very much part of the timing was certainly the Israeli elections, but also to a large degree the window of opportunity during the transition.
I don't have any inside information. It's certainly quite plausible that the Israelis would not have wanted to have major fighting in Gaza going on and lots of horrific images at the same time as the new president's being inaugurated. And so that may well have been a factor in their timing of the operation in Gaza and for the ceasefire.
To what extent, Christian, do you think that Barack Obama risks alienating himself from the American public, which is very focused on the desperate economic situation here, if he focuses too much on foreign policy too early?
Well, I think that the American public is expecting him to focus on foreign policy as well. I think they want a president who can walk and chew gum at the same time, and that's exactly what he's going to be. I think the economy is obviously job number one. It's priority number one for him. But there are a lot of people in this country who, especially the people who voted for Barack Obama, who voted for him to end the war in Iraq, to re-engage in Afghanistan, to engage perhaps more deeply in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I mean, these are issues that do matter to Americans, and they'll be expecting him to address those.
Okay, Ambassador, we have a question that came in from our live station chat room that's going on right now. It's a very vibrant debate, and then Jim, who's in Oregon here in the US, says, if Obama has no fear of negotiation, as he claims, then why did he not contact Hamas this morning? That would make sense considering the past few weeks in Gaza, of course referring to the fact he did make a number of calls to key leaders in the Middle East.
Well, I think there are lots of reasons why he wouldn't have contacted Hamas, including the fact that it's not a recognized government, and it's an organization that is on the U.S. Terrorist list. But in his inaugural address, he did reach out to hostile regimes and said, if you unclench your fist and reach out to us, we're prepared to reach out to you. Now, that clearly was a signal to Iran, but I think the same point could apply to other regimes, if, including Hamas, if it gets out of the business of launching attacks on Israel, focuses on putting its own house in order and now process of reconstruction, then I think that there is a possibility for dialogue and engagement.
Let me get a question from Said in London before we take a break. Said, what would you like to ask?
Yes, Mr. Reyes, thank you for having me in your show.
Go ahead with your question, please.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. I'm living in London, and I come from Afghanistan. And just I'd like to ask the guest if Mr. Obama can promise for Afghanistan people he can bring peace in Afghanistan. I don't think that 30,000 soldiers can help the situation in Afghanistan. Okay. I think it's better to help more with economically and bring more
Okay, listen, Said, what I'll do is I'm going to take a very short break here and get to some answers on that when we get back here. Now, as we take that break, don't forget we'll have more of our discussion, but you can look at Live Station, which is going on right now, the conversation with you can join the conversation with your questions and comments. Log on to livestation.com, enter the chat room where the debate's taking place right now, and we'll be right back.